One of the beauties of the NBA offseason is you can carry more guys on your active roster than you can actually have when game one begins. But of course, over the next several months, the Memphis Grizzlies are going to have to make some decisions. In the past, it's been pretty difficult. This time around, it may not be. Obviously, things can change over the next several weeks and months. But for now, it seems like there's a clear-cut spread and sprint to the NBA's Memphis Grizzlies having their roster set. We're going to talk about that and more on this episode of Locked On Grizzlies.
You are Locked On Grizzlies, your daily Memphis Grizzlies podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
It is a Thursday edition of the show. Those of you that are in Memphis checking us out, I hope that your air conditioning is on, that your electricity has returned. We won't say they that will not be named here on Locked On Grizzlies.
They don't deserve our publicity.
Don't want to give them the free advertising. This is valuable space here on Locked On Grizzlies. But hopefully you've got some AC going in these hot summer weeks, and things are getting better for you there in Memphis. I know it's been rough for our Memphians. And, of course, so many of you checking us out over on Locked On Grizzlies. It is much appreciated. I'm Joe Mullinax of Bluff City Media. You can also check me out as an SB Nation contributor over at SB Nation every couple of weeks or so. Damichael Cole is my co-host. He is the Memphis Grizzlies beat writer for the Commercial Appeal there in Memphis, Tennessee. And Damichael, now I know you're just kind of getting over it. Spoiler alert, Damichael is one of the ones that has been struggling with the electricity issue. And by some minor miracle, we're able to get this Thursday edition of the show together before Damichael heads out on a well-deserved few days off.
Yeah, and let me add to what we said earlier. Major thank you. I'm sure we have some MLG, we have some people at the company who probably tune into Locked On Grizzlies. And I'd love to say that we appreciate all the hard work that you guys have done. I've been driving down the street and I saw Winchester. I mean, it was rough over there, but people have been working around the clock nonstop to get the lights going up for a lot of people. So much appreciation to the people who've been out there working really hard to kind of restore some of the lights in this city.
One of the hardest things, regardless of where you live, where you're at, whatever you're frustrated about in terms of a service that's being provided, the person that you're talking to or the person that you might see working on Winchester, like you just talked about, they're not the reason that there's.
They have nothing to do with it.
So you might be mad at that individual because they're wearing the logo of the company, but that is not the person that you should be directing your anger towards. And it's the same thing when you're calling about, an issue with your cable or having to make a car appointment or whatever the case might be. So shout out to those folks working hard, trying to get things going there in Memphis. I think that's a great way to look at it, partner. We are, of course, Locked On Grizzlies, not Locked On Utilities. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts. We are also proud members of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team each and every day. Check us out on YouTube. Like, comment, rate, review, subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Damichael, on this episode of the show, we're going to take a little bit of a look at the new guys, right, in a roundabout way. We've talked about some of them to varying degrees, but we're going to go in a more macro sense on this particular episode. We're going to go the 30,000-foot view and kind of work our way down, if that makes sense. And from the 30,000-foot perspective, the Grizzlies have, at this time, we assume, 20 guys on the roster. 3 of them, again, assuming that Gigi Jackson is going to be the third two-way contract under the new CBA. That hasn't been made official yet, but that's an assumption I think most folks are making. So you've got those 3, right? You've got Jackson, you've got Gilliard, and you've got Vince Williams Jr. Then you've got the 2 new guys that have come in, the Dylan Brooks sign and trade and the picks exchange with Phoenix. That's Josh Christopher and Isaiah Todd, respectively. And then, of course, the 15 dudes that make up the Memphis Grizzlies, including 2 newbies, Marcus Smart and Derrick Rose. We're going to talk about all of those names that I just mentioned, the new ones at least, on this edition of the show. But, Damichael, you've read the CBA. I've read the CBA, but it's kind of your day job to understand it. So I'll let you take the lead here. The roster can theoretically get bigger. It probably won't, give or take a trade that the Grizzlies maybe are a third team on. But it'll be interesting to see how the roster maintains itself going into training camp here in about 2.5 months.
Yeah, it's a lot more changes that will. In the case of the Grizzlies, you're allowed to have a 15-man roster, which is the regular season limit. And you also, this season, with the new, changes to the CBA, instead of having two-way players, you can have 3. So at the end of the day, you can have 18 players total who break training camp and who are on the roster on the very first day of the NBA's regular season. But right now, the Grizzlies have 17 standard contracts. You only can have 15. And they're gonna have to get that number down. They probably bring in a couple more bodies. I'll go ahead and say this. I've been hearing rumors of another name, a popular name that could be brought in, a popular basketball name it is, that could be brought into training camp.
Interesting.
The news will probably come out while I'm out on break here, and if it doesn't, I'll be prepared to say who it was when I get back. But with that being said, the Grizzlies are going to bring in some camp bodies, and they need to. You look at the injury situation. Desmond Bane, there's a possibility that he isn't ready at the beginning of camp. There's a possibility. Steven Adams, we've seen how this situation has been. There's still the expectation that he'll be there at the beginning of the season, but there are question marks. So you need to bring extra guys into camp, make sure you have extra bodies. And at the end of the day, right now, 2 guys are going to be on the outside looking in, Joe.
Does this mystery person, who maybe I'll be talking about over the next week on my own here on Locked On Grizzlies, does his name, just blink twice if his name rhymes with Pooty Day?
No, I don't think that's it. I don't think that's it.
Dang it. That's what I was hoping for. I'm a Rudy Gay stan from way back. So if it was the recently waived by the Thunder Rudy Gay, I was
Pooty Gay.
Yeah. Pooty Tay or something like that. Dang it. Okay. I'll have to.
Similar position, though. Similar position.
Oh,
okay.
All
right. Now I'll leave it at that. And
fair enough. You can't give away all the good stuff.
We'll circle back. We'll
circle back to it. I'll call you out on it in a week or so, partner, if nothing comes. You've put yourself out there now, but you're usually pretty good with that stuff. So that tells me something's coming down the pike. Again, we'll talk more about this later in the show. I feel like, no offense to Christopher and Todd, there is a very distinct likelihood that those are the 2 guys and whoever else is brought in beyond that are not going to make the mix. But I have a question for you. Again, I have read the CBA. I understand it. But again, this is your day job. It's my hobby to get yelled at online by people. Is it possible, and maybe this is a question that some of our listeners might have, some of our viewers on YouTube, is it possible for them to waive a Christopher, to waive a Todd, and then they get re-signed to the Memphis Hustle, like an Exhibit 10 kind of contract situation? Or is it because they are actual NBA full-blown deals that wouldn't be as simple to execute?
I think you can. I think they are able to do that, especially with those guys in particular. I think it would be different if you had players who were tenured longer with the Grizzlies. Say like the Chris Paul example is a good one.
Yeah,
the Phoenix situation with him, and there were people trying to say, oh well, Phoenix may be waiving him to get him back at a smaller deal, and they just couldn't do that. Right. So I think in the case of those guys, particularly, I think Isaiah Todd has a year guaranteed, and it's very small salary. I think they can. Bring those guys back. I'm not sure 100%, but I think that is an option that could be pursued. But I'll tell you this: I think if they waive those guys, they're not going to be interested in bringing them back. I definitely more so with Todd, but we'll get to it. Right.
We'll talk about it coming up next. And I asked that question because I know that the development system of the Grizzlies, other teams across the NBA do similar things, of course.
Right.
But Memphis really uses the hustle as a solid developmental system within their own schemes. And if they like Christopher, if they like Todd, in theory, they could keep those guys around. It's almost like with NFL training camps opening here in the next several days. You waive a guy, you sign him back on the practice squad if he clears waivers, right?
Exactly.
That sort of stuff. That's kind of how I was viewing it and thinking of it. So I appreciate that input from the wise Damichael Cole there in Memphis, covering the Grizzlies for the Commercial Appeal. When we come back here on Locked On Grizzlies, we are going to be talking between Christopher and Todd. Obviously, Damichael had a great episode last week taking a look at Christopher, what he did from the Rockets' perspective. But we'll take a look at those two guys, which one would make the most sense if they somehow beat out Kenneth Lofton Jr., which please don't yell at me. That's not what I'm saying is going to happen. Don't you're going to try to start something coming up next, Damichael. I know you are. That's not what this is. If something were to happen trade-wise and extra roster spot comes open, who is the guy that makes the most sense that would stick around potentially? We'll talk about that next here on Locked On Grizzlies. But first, this episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. Big fans of FanDuel here at Locked On Grizzlies. Take your first swing at betting MLB on FanDuel and get 10 times your first bet amount in bonus bets up to $200. That's right. Just bet $20 and you will land $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. That's $200 that you can spend betting everything from the money line to the over/under to who you think is going to get the first home run. All on an app that is safe, secure, and super easy to use. Plus, when you win, you get paid instantly. There's no better place to bet on Major League Baseball than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So sign up today and visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get up to $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, an official partner of Major League Baseball. We're talking Christopher versus Todd because it's the middle of July and we have to have something to talk about next here on Locked On Grizzlies. Welcome back to Locked On Grizzlies. I hope you stuck around after that wonderful lead-in post-ad there. My name is Joe Mullinax. I am of Bluff City Media, and I also contribute over at SB Nation. I'm joined by my co-host, Damichael Cole, of the Commercial Appeal in Memphis, Tennessee. Follow him on Twitter at Damichael C. You can follow me on Twitter at Joe Mullinax. Between the two of us, we've covered the team for a while. Damichael is there in Memphis, boots on the ground. I've followed the Grizzlies in some capacity since 2011. We've got you covered, and you've come to the right place, despite what I said earlier on Locked On Grizzlies. I was being facetious. Hopefully folks can pick up on that and understand that, as I mentioned before, please, anytime I mention a possible criticism of Kenneth Lofton Jr., I don't know how often you read our comment section.
They come at you.
But you know what, Damichael? Quick tangent. Sometimes it's you that starts it, or it's you that says it first. And yet I'm the one. We'll agree. You'll agree with me. Yeah. And I'll be the one that gets yelled at. Is it because I have a bigger head?
I know what it is.
I'll
say it like this. I'm like, hey, the front court is stuffed. So Kenneth Lofton Jr.'s chances. And you'll be like, he's going to get cut. And they're like, what? No. Look, you gotta soften up to these Grizzlies fans a little bit. Let's just butter up to them a little bit. That's all.
You're saying you're a better politician than me. That's what you're saying. You massage the situation better.
I think I could have did good in law school. I think I could have did all right.
Okay, well let's massage the Christopher versus Todd situation. Phrasing is important here on Locked On Grizzlies. I think that when you look at these two players, again, I can't stress enough. I agree with you that I'm fairly confident they're not going to be around beyond the end of training camp, whatever the date is that the NBA says that roster needs to be set. Memphis will be where they need to be, and those are the two most likely candidates to be waived. But let's say in a hypothetical situation, Memphis gets involved in the James Harden trade. Memphis gets involved in Damian Lillard, not to acquire those players, but to help facilitate a deal, provide assets, those kinds of things. If you look at the two guys, to me, the one, and again, you guys talked about him last week. It was a great episode. Josh Christopher, if I'm picking between the two, because of connections with John Morant, because of the skill set he provides. He's a scorer. He can play the guard, which, you nailed the fact. You didn't necessarily predict Derrick Rose, but you predicted somebody like Derrick Rose would be the guy that they signed. They still need bodies like that. And Christopher is versatile enough on the perimeter that he can play, not necessarily full-blown point guard, but he can play a combo guard situation. He can be a secondary facilitator of offense. He can score in bunches. There's obviously other pretty significant holes in his game. That's why he is where he is at this stage of his NBA career. But that doesn't mean that he doesn't have value, or that in this hypothetical where he'd be the 15th man, that you could do a lot worse than Christopher, like, Todd, for example. So I think Christopher is a pretty obvious, in my opinion, choice for being that guy if an additional roster spot were to come available, not because Kenneth Lofton got waived, because that's not going to happen.
With all respect to Isaiah Todd, because he was a top high school recruit, took the G League Ignite route, and turned himself into, I think he got drafted in the first round, turned himself to a first round draft pick.
Talented.
Salute to him from that standpoint. But there's a reason that I did an episode on Josh Christopher.
Right.
And not Isaiah Todd. Josh Christopher is a guy who is a proven scorer. You look at his G League numbers, he goes down there and it's pickings. It's easy pickings for him. Yeah, he's averaging 20 plus points per game. Isaiah Todd, who's barely played in the NBA to this point, he struggles in G League minutes as well. Yeah. So I don't see the upside from that perspective. There's an upside from the talent perspective, but as we've seen time and time again, talent is it's a very small part of the portion. You're a coach. I remember coaches used to always tell me, the game is way more mental than it is, with the physical side of it. And that's kind of how the NBA is to a certain degree. And that's why.
Sorry to cut you off. One of the hardest things for any athlete, but especially elite
Coach Mullinax talking here.
Yes, this is a Coach Mullinax moment. Because Coach Mullinax used to be a college athlete. I played college football, and I used to be a good high school football player, and I would see myself as better than others, and I would think that I could go to a smaller level of college football like I did. I played Division III, shout out Randolph-Macon, and I thought that I could show up, and I was really good in high school, and this was smaller college ball, and I was going to do work, and it was the opposite. Everybody was me. Amplify that by 100, right? I'm not trying to say I'm on the level of an NBA athlete, because I'm not. I'm comparing the situation, because Isaiah Todd might have been really good where he was, and he might have been in a situation in the past where his athleticism, his skill set, whatever it was in that particular instance, even, going to the Ignite, maybe there it was good enough. But as you move up into situations that are advanced beyond what you were at, you need to add to your level. There's levels to this, the kids say.
Yeah,
right.
There's
levels to this. And I think that Josh Christopher understands that maybe a little bit better, or maybe he has more capacity to build upon the skill set that he has than Todd does.
That's
maybe it's a combination of all those things, but I just, watching both of them, and I have actually watched both of them play basketball, I just see more possibility in Christopher and what he can physically be when compared to the potential of Todd. It feels like the juice is all squeezed out almost of what professional basketball player Isaiah Todd can be. Maybe that's true of Christopher too, but I think there's more wiggle room there, if that makes sense.
You don't know what you're getting from Todd at this point at all. You really don't. He's a below 40% shooter as a 4. You just don't know what you're going to get.
Right.
With Josh Christopher, you see the shot making flash. You go look at the G League games, and he's shown it even in spurts. There was a March game from his rookie season that I was looking at not too long ago, just seeing him, and I think he scored like 29 points, and he was cooking. Like, he's got some stuff in his bag. He's got the off the dribble bag that we have clamored for the Grizzlies to go out and acquire more of to help their half court offense. He's a guy in theory, he has the type of, bag to his game that could help you in that area. So you see the potential upside more from the Josh Christopher standpoint. I actually did a deeper dive on him, and I saw that coming into his draft class, he ranked in the number 91st percentile in transition scoring. So if you think about it like that, one of the Grizzlies' biggest strengths is transition scoring over the past couple seasons. He can run the lane, he'll fill the lane, he can finish around the rim in transition opportunities. He can dribble, he can play on the ball, he can play off the ball in those situations. He fits that standpoint where he's not a good spot up shooter. Think Zaire Williams rookie year a little bit. Wasn't really a great spot up shooter. Had his moments. He shot better in the second half of the season. But where Zaire really kind of made himself comfortable is he got now in transition. And he was scoring 2-3 easy dunks or layups every single game, it felt like. So Josh Christopher, I see the upside more. Defensively, there's upside there as well. I was talking to one of the Houston Rockets beat writers recently, and he was telling me that the reason that the Rockets drafted him in the first round, a big reason why, was the defensive upside. So a lot of people were saying, well, why did the Rockets let him go? It's simple. If you've been paying attention to what's going on over there with the Rockets, they had 7 first-round. They drafted 7 first-round picks in the last 2 seasons. You think we've been making a big deal out of the Grizzlies doubling and tripping down on youth by acquiring just a couple first-round picks in a draft? They had 7 in the last 2 drafts. There's not enough room for all those guys. I'm going to mess up his name, but he's the big man that got cut over there. You know his name. It's the Usman. I think it's Gabara.
Garuba? Something like that?
That's it. That's it. Garuba. Yeah, there we go. That's what we're a team over here on Locked On Grizzlies. That guy was cut as well, and there's some upside to this game. You watch him play, he can play. It's just they drafted him the same year as Sagoon. Ty Washington got cut, who I saw play, in high school, and he's really dynamic. And they cut Ty Washington, first-round pick. And, well, not cut him, but, they traded him. Yeah. They put him as part of a trade. Same thing with Josh Christopher. They parted ways with – that's 3 of the first-round picks in these recent drafts. And Josh Christopher is one of those guys who's on the short end of the stick. You got Kevin Porter. You got Jalen Green. You got all these other guys that they're pushing towards building around. Then you bring in Fred VanVleet and Dylan Brooks. You just don't got room for them. And Memphis is another place where we'll see if he can work his way into the rotation.
The Rockets are giving away picks to move on from some of these guys, right? In terms of second rounders. So I think that's a really good point. And Memphis has gotten good at taking flyers on pieces they think can be fits within what they do. And Christopher makes more sense in that way than Todd. We talked about it for about 10 minutes there, but I think, again, if you've watched them play, it's fairly straightforward, at least in my opinion. Yep. Another thing that's fairly straightforward is that Derrick Rose and Marcus Smart are not getting waived. They will not be in that conversation. They will be part of the Memphis Grizzlies' final 15 when opening night begins. Let's take a look when we come back here on Locked On Grizzlies, Damichael, at some underrated pieces of what Smart and Rose can bring to the table. Because we've talked about leadership. We've talked about facilitating offense. There are things that you and I, I'll talk about one guy, you'll talk about the other, that we think are going under the radar a bit, at least from what I've seen and what you've seen. We'll talk about that next here on Locked On Grizzlies. Stay with us. Welcome back to Locked On Grizzlies. We're finishing up our Thursday edition of the podcast. I am excited to be joined by my co-host, Damichael Cole of the Commercial Appeal there in Memphis, Tennessee. Very excited that my partner's getting a well-deserved little vacation in coming up here soon. I'm going to miss him as I go solo like I did to him last week. But, a well-deserved break after all the work that Damichael put in. So a shout out to Damichael. Shout out to his Twitter account at DamichaelC. Make sure you're following him if you don't already do so. I am Joe Mullinax. Follow me on Twitter at Joe Mullinax. And Damichael, I'll let you go first here in terms of because you and I have talked about this and I've kind of alluded to it. Maybe I'm a better massager of this particular player than I am the other that we won't mention his name again before I get yelled at. Derrick Rose, I am cool with the signing. I've said that numerous times, and it's not what I would have done, but I understand all the things you said leading up to it about needing another guard. Obviously, John Morant being suspended plays a pretty large role in that logic, I would imagine. Again, the leadership angle. But when you look at Derrick Rose, he just hasn't been much in a significant amount of time, right? A couple of years here, which I know you're going to take and twist here in a moment, which is fair. But I do think that you're about to make a fair point with Rose in terms of people like me that are not as excited about the signing. Again, they understand it. They're cool with it. I am cool with it. But I'm not saying, woohoo, Derrick Rose, he's going to help us win some games. You perhaps see it a little bit differently.
Yeah, I took the liberty of just talking to a bunch of people out there in New York. See what I did there? I took the liberty of talking to those people.
The liberty, WNBA drop. I like that.
How about that? So I talked to a bunch of people in New York about Derrick Rose. What does he bring to the table? Who is he? Can he defend? what can he bring to the Grizzlies at the point of his career? And something that popped up a lot was the fact that you'll be surprised by this show, but this is a guy who's kind of used the comparison of Tom Brady in terms of how long he wants to play in the NBA.
Oh,
Derrick Rose doesn't want to hang it up anytime soon.
I am surprised by that.
He's coming to hoop. He's coming to play. And he understands there are certain limitations from a health standpoint. One thing that I heard is Derrick Rose doesn't play pickup basketball anymore. In the summertime, when everyone's getting active playing their pickup basketball, he has to really focus more on maintenance, saving his mileage for the season. You know the history with the knee injuries and everything. We don't have to go into that whole spiel, but he's very big on mileage because he wants to play much longer in this game. He really cares about the game. That alone, hearing those things, I feel like there's something left in the tank. Now, you go back to last season, this past season at least. What went wrong? Because it's had a couple years, and you knew I was going to say something about that. You knew I was. Because you go back 2 seasons ago, he was averaging over 12 points per game. Numbers were slightly down from, I think, shooting around 50% to around 46% from the field. But he also was shooting 40% from three-point range with, if the Grizzlies get that, they win. I mean, so 46% from the field, 40% from three-point range. People know that even though he lost that elite explosiveness, Derrick Rose has still been a quality NBA finisher. The difference between those first 2 Knicks years and this past one, talking to some people out there, he didn't have the same explosiveness. And it was a smaller sample size. So there is some thought that maybe, hey, with the Knicks sitting him down, he, sat behind Miles McBride, Emmanuel Quickley, and all those guys over there. With him not playing that much in the latter part of the season, plus the offseason, there might be more mileage on Derrick Rose to have a season like he did 2 years ago, which only 26 games. But if the Grizzlies get 12 points per game from Derrick Rose, they won. Like, if they get 14 points per game in 6th Man of the Year candidate Derrick Rose, you really hit it out the park. But at the end of the day, I think there's still some value there. You don't need him to be amazing. You just need him to be that shot creator, get to the rim, knock down some three-pointers, get other guys involved, all things I think he's very capable of. And he's in tune. I just need to make sure that people understand that. He's a guy who still eats, sleeps, breathes basketball, wants to be a part of this game for much longer. And I think that's important for his Grizzlies tenure. Because some people probably think he's just coming to sit on the bench and basically have a suit on and be a mentor. And no, that's just not the case.
And I think you just made an excellent point, partner, because one of the things that I, again, have been okay with the signing over is the fact that Rose will be most important the first 25 games of the season when John Morant is not able to play. So to your point, if all he has in him is 25 to 30 games, if they're the 25 or 30 before Christmas, then so be it. And he can, be worn out after that, theoretically speaking, even if that's the worst case scenario. He is not someone that they are going
won't need him for much after that point.
Right.
Yeah.
So I do think that is an important thing to point out. That's a really good point. For me, with Marcus Smart, one of the criticisms of him, beyond not being a 6'7" wing like an OG Anunoby or Mikal Bridges, is the fact that he is not a knockdown 3-point shooter. That is not something that is part of his reputation. Like this past season, when he struggled, a lot of times it was from range. He shot for the regular season 34%. For example, he shot 33% the regular season before that, 33% the regular season before that. So we have a pretty large sample size that suggests that Marcus Smart, and all these stats are coming from Cleaning the Glass, by the way. We have a pretty large sample size suggesting that Marcus Smart is a below average 3-point shooter. By the way, that's all better than Dillon Brooks. So the Grizzlies offense will improve just because Dillon Brooks isn't there anymore. I do think that's important to point out. But on the flip side, one of the reasons Marcus Smart is in Memphis, I know you know this, partner, Zach Kleiman, Grizzlies GM, and others have said this, playoff experience over the last 3 seasons. Okay, so just going 2021, 2021, 2022, 2022, 2023. Marcus Smart has played in 47 playoff games. 47. And across those 3 seasons of playoff runs, the shortest one obviously coming in that first year, 2020, 2021, he shot 37% from beyond the arc. In the 2021-2022 run, he shot 36% from 3. And in 2022-2023, this past season, he shot 39% from beyond the arc total.
Playoff performer.
Is a playoff performer. And again, if you look at it through that lens, Draymond Green has the famous among NBA folk quote now, you're looking for 16-game players, right? Guys that can win you 16 games in the playoffs and postseason to get you an NBA championship. And I think that while Marcus Smart may not be the ideal 82-game player, especially for what the Grizzlies needed in that small forward spot, like we talked about on yesterday's show, the reality is they did a phenomenal job bringing in a guy who is going to, when the lights are on bright, where, if we're being honest with one another, the Memphis Grizzlies shrunk from that a little bit against the Los Angeles Lakers. They took a step back in that way. Marcus Smart ain't stepping back to no one. He is going to be a wonderful role model in that way and help get that team to a place where they can put themselves in those adverse situations and fight through it a little bit better, because Marcus Smart has done it time and again. He rises and raises the level of his game in the playoffs. And I think that even though he's not a knockdown guy in the regular season, there is solid evidence that he does better in those playoff situations. And that is when the Memphis Grizzlies need him to be his best. Unlike Derrick Rose, at that stage, if they're counting on Rose, then something's gone horribly wrong in terms of that guard rotation. Thank you so much for checking out Locked On Grizzlies, wherever you're at, however you're checking us out over on YouTube. Like, comment, rate, review, subscribe, wherever you get your podcasts. We're proud members of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team each and every day, free and available wherever you get your podcasts. As I mentioned earlier, Damichael is going on a well-deserved vacation, so I'll have the next several shows solo. I'm looking forward to it because, I like to hear myself talk, but I know Damichael is a major focal point of the show, and I will miss Damichael terribly, as I always do. I wish you safe travels, partner, and happy trails, and we'll see you next week, and I'll hold down the fort. Okay. I won't burn it down too much on Friday with any hot takes or anything. I'll be sure to keep it under control.
Yeah, I'll be checking in, and we got to check in, make sure everything's going good around. But Joe's going to take care of it, Joe. People, I tell you all the time, people in Memphis here, and I see them, they talk about the show, they talk about how great you are. One person told me this a long time ago, not a long time ago because I'm very young, but when I got into the journalism business, and you know how big Twitter has become as part of sports journalism. Someone told me that you just got to remember that Twitter isn't necessarily reality. It stuck with me because think of Kevin Durant, for example. You go in his Twitter comments, it's a bunch of hate. But you see Kevin Durant come to the game. John Morant, we got him in Memphis. I could have just used John Morant. You go to his Twitter. He's basically turned off his comments because there's a bunch of trolls going in his comments. But literally, when he got back from that last suspension, I told you how we were in Atlanta and the little kids are screaming his name. And I'm like, this is nothing like Twitter. So I wanted to use that example for you, Joe. You might get a lot of it on Twitter, but in person, the people tell me that they love Joe.
Oh, well, that's good to hear. Well, hopefully they'll start commenting on YouTube and tweeting at me on Twitter at Joe Mullinax. We're going to have fun. On tomorrow's episode, we'll take a little bit more of a look at Marcus Smart. I'm interested in how he, Luke Kennard, Desmond Bane, maybe a little bit of precedent, smaller lineups, how that's worked in the past. I might wax nostalgic about Rudy Gay a little bit after being waived by the Thunder. We might get weird on a Friday. Who knows? You'll just have to tune in and check it out to see as I go solo these next few episodes. But I'm happy for Damichael. He deserves a break, and it's going to be a great vacation for him. I'm still going to be here with you. Make sure you're here with me. For Damichael, I am Joe. Stay locked in wherever you're getting your Grizzlies fix. Continue to make us part of your Memphis Grizzlies experience. Until Friday, stay locked in.